Hello mates, I hope you're all doing well. Happy Halloween and happy Hallows Eve to you all. Today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different in keeping with the Ween season, and I'm going to be going through my personal top 10 horror films. So horror movies are something that I've actually only gotten into in the last couple of years, to be honest. I really didn't enjoy them very much when I was younger, or at least I didn't think that I did. I didn't really like being scared, didn't like being made to jump, and I just realised one day that actually a lot of the films and TV shows that I actually really enjoy incorporated a lot of the elements of horror. I really love the TV show Dexter, for example, which can be pretty gruesome at times, has a lot of the kind of whodunit sort of thing that a lot of slasher movies employ. So I decided that I would give horror films a go, and there's something that I've gotten pretty into since. What I personally kind of enjoy in a horror film is some good jumps, some good kills, and a compelling narrative. I don't find that I enjoy films that are really disturbing much. For example, I watched The Ring recently and I was just like, why am I watching a horse die? I didn't really have a very nice time watching that at all, and although I did enjoy it, I would say the same kind of thing about The Exorcist as well. Great movies, but they're not really the kind of thing that I'm looking for in a horror film, you know? I can feel people calling me soft already and going, those films aren't even scary! Remember, this is my personal list, so if you disagree with me, remember this is just what I like and what I'm into, so chances are our tastes, they're not going to line up exactly. Although I'm right and you're wrong. With all that said, let's get into it. Obviously, spoiler warning if you've not seen any of these movies. So we'll start with some honourable mentions. So the first Final Destination movie, John Carpenter's Halloween, The Exorcist 3, Psycho 2, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original one, and The Shining. So first up at number 10, we have the movie that I would say is really the forefather of slasher films, and that is Psycho. I saw Psycho for the first time on Halloween a couple of years ago, and although of course I'd heard a lot about it and some of the key plot points from it, it still managed to blow my brain. The music of course is so iconic, and although the movie kind of starts out slow, the music does a lot to keep you in this constant state of dread, of expectation of what's going to happen next, and I think it's one of the best scorings for a movie ever. Period, regardless of genre. Clearly, a lot of directors would agree with me with that too, as you can hear a lot of music in horror that clearly has taken its cues from the soundtrack of Psycho. On top of that, obviously, Anthony Perkins' portrait of Norman Bates is phenomenal, and even when he's kind of presenting in this very charming, mild-mannered kind of character, there is always something kind of unsettling behind his eyes the whole time. Also, the idea of killing who you assume is going to be the main protagonist and introducing a new protagonist halfway through the film is such a brilliant one, and something the writers have clearly dabbled in from time to time since in a clear tribute to Psycho. And I mean, where better to take your cues from than one of the greatest horror movies of all time. Next up at number 9, we have the first Saw movie. I grew up kind of thinking that these films are just some nonsense about gory traps and torture scenes, and when I actually finally sat down and watched this film, I quickly realised just how wrong I was. While Saw, of course, is a horror movie, it is also predominantly a psychological thriller and a whodunit kind of film. Like Psycho, I knew what the ending was going into the film, but that didn't take away from the weight and the drama of the big reveal. I think Danny Glover's character is fascinating and really helps to anchor and to drive this movie. I think the film is paced so brilliantly with these long, meaty scenes that constantly drive the plot forward and keep you on your tippy toes. I find it so interesting that this film was shot very quickly with an inexperienced director at the time in James Wan on a very tight budget, which forced them to constantly be creative and adapt, and the film is all the better for it. Okay, at number 8 we have this classic slasher film, A Nightmare on Elm Street. I think this movie was such a great subversion of the kind of slasher films that were huge at the time, with the holiday slashers that were trying to ape Halloween constantly really ruling the roost at this point in time, and then bringing in this kind of supernatural element with this serial killer that kills you in your dreams, which is just a really fascinating idea and a really different killer from the other movies that I mentioned earlier, which tended to have a killer in a mask who tended to kind of silently stalk his victims. And then in contrast, you've got Freddy Krueger, who really likes to taunt and threaten his victims, wants to show them his face, which leaves you with a killer who is just as creepy now as he was nearly 40 years ago when this movie first came out. Oh, the kills also really make this movie. This film has some of the most memorable moments and kills of all time in it. You've got the close call for Nancy in the bathtub scene, and of course the very famous scene where the character of Glenn is pulled into his bed, and then the ridiculous amount of blood that then shoots out. Such a great kill. This film has really stood the test of time, and it's because of a great villain, but also a really strong protagonist in Nancy Thompson, who for my money is one of the best final girls ever. Next up at number 7 is going to be this really iconic slasher film, another one from the 80s. It's Friday the 13th. Whilst I know this film takes a lot of inspiration from Halloween, which came out 2 years before this, I personally just enjoy Friday the 13th more. This film has some really great kills in it, especially when Jack's throat is pierced with the arrow. The special effects for that are just so gruesome, but in the best kind of way. I also really adore the character of Mrs. Voorhees. Betsy Palmer does such a great job with the small amount of screen time that she has. She does a phenomenal job of portraying this unhinged woman, and my first thought when I saw this character was that it harkened back to Norman Bates, but Betsy absolutely made this character her own, and a really well-rounded character that's really scary without needing a mask. This film never needed Jason Voorhees, as iconic as he's become in subsequent films, because Mrs. Voorhees is a phenomenal villain with clear motivations who really carries the final act of this film. Also, the addition of Crazy Ralph, who you think is maybe going to turn out to be the killer, was such a clever inclusion in this movie as well. Right at number 6, we have John Carpenter's The Thing, which I believe is a remake of another film that came out in the 50s. What really makes me love this movie and put it so high up on the list is the phenomenal and quite frankly sickening practical effects that are used throughout this movie. Even today, in the year 2023, these effects still make me feel a little bit sick, but in the best kind of way. The practical effects, which still stand up today and actually I think look way better than some of the effects that we see today, are really what define this film for me. I think also the fact that the villain has no kind of main form, it can manipulate itself, transform itself and attach itself into any other living organisms is really what makes this villain so effective and so scary. It's also a great performance from Kurt Russell as RJ, one of the best Kurt Russell performances that I've ever seen. And the supporting actors, they do a great job as well. I love the ending to this movie, the fact that it ends on kind of a downer with Childs and RJ essentially freezing to death, knowing that they can't really trust each other. Not every film needs a happy ending, and this film is an absolute shining example of that. Next up, at number 5, we have the movie Aliens. I know that calling this a horror film is maybe a stretch because this is actually predominantly a science fiction action film, whilst the first Alien movie is essentially a slasher in space. James Cameron had a really difficult job here trying to follow up the original, which is just such an iconic and genre-defining film, and Mr. Cameron decided to go in a very different direction here. Where the first movie had one alien, this movie has aliens. Hence the title. Clever marketing, right? James Cameron is really the king of the sequel movie, not being afraid to tear up the rule book and go in a very different direction while still feeling really faithful to the original. The film is really anchored by the roles of Ripley and Newt and the mother and daughter dynamic between them, and then how this is then mirrored with the relationship between the alien queen and her children, which was just such a beautiful idea. Sigourney Weaver, as always, puts in a phenomenal shift to reprising the role of Ripley. I love how effectively this movie builds the tension from when the Marines first enter the colony and never lets it go. And obviously the end scene is one of the most famous scenes ever, and for a good reason. Okay, then at number 4 we have Alien no S. It really is a constant battle in my brain between Alien and Aliens for which one is better for me. They're both quite different in the best kind of way, but I finally settled on the first movie as being superior for this list when I was putting it together. If you were to ask me again tomorrow though, I may tell you the other way around. Both these movies are just so freaking great. I love Ridley Scott, he's one of my favourite directors, and this man knows his way around sci-fi better than any other. This is also one of my favourite John Hurt performances, as limited as his screen time and dialogue is. He does a wonderful job of portraying Kane. I love how slow this film starts and continues building tension throughout. It feels very much like you're experiencing these events in real time along with the characters, which is just so effective. It's also pretty unique in that the film doesn't reveal who the main character is until the third act, when Ripley is revealed to be the final girl, if you like. It's incredible to me that this was Sigourney Weaver's first big credit, and yet she does a really phenomenal job of anchoring this movie, the best final girl of all time for me. Next up, at number 3, is actually a movie that I only saw very recently in the last few weeks, but is shot right up near the top of my list, and that is A Quiet Place. I've heard really good things about this movie for years and years now, but I only recently got around to actually watching this movie, and it blew my mind. Will you shut up? It's a staggering premise for a horror film to have the villain, the creature, rely on sound to hunt, which immediately creates so much tension from all the silence in the movie, which immediately makes literally any sound so much more impactful. The creature design is also staggering. John Krasinski obviously went down the Jaws route of not really showing the creature for the majority of the movie, which then makes everything so much scarier. It was also so effective to kill off the youngest child right at the beginning of the movie, which really creates the feeling of no one is safe. All of these characters are expendable, and that idea is really enforced because John Krasinski's character is also killed at the end. The ending of the movie was so effective, with it being left a bit kind of open-ended and leaving the audience thinking, well, are they gonna survive or not? There are so many effective things in this movie, from the foreshadowing with the nail on the stairs to the rocket ship, to, as I was saying, the use of silence and having the characters only be able to communicate with sign language, and the casting of an actual deaf actor and making the sign language and the character's cochlear implant so integral to the plot of this movie. Okay, so now we get to my top 2. At number 2, we have the movie Scream. I love the Scream movies so much, even all the sequels are really great slasher movies. The idea of having a slasher movie with characters that are both knowledgeable about the existence of other slasher movies and that they're in a slasher movie is just such a great idea for a movie, and this movie really balances the humour and the scares so perfectly. Each character is a defined, living, breathing, relatable character. Sydney for sure is up there with Ripley as one of the best final girls of all time. She's just so badass, not someone that you would ever want to fuck with. Every single character in this movie is just so integral to the success of the film. It was such a great idea to have the reveal that there were 2 killers all along to explain why Ghostface could be anywhere at any given time, and there are some really cool details put in here if you look closely that allow you to work out who's wearing the Ghostface costume for each kill. Speaking of kills, there is some brilliant kills throughout this movie. The opening kill obviously completely transcends pop culture at this point. The garage door and the death of Tatum, the deaths of Stu and Billy at the end are executed so perfectly. This movie is so funny as well, especially the characters of Stu and Randy, which really lures you into this full sense of security, which makes the scares so much more effective. I adore this film. And lastly, at number 1, we have my favourite horror movie of all time, and that is Jaws. Now, I know that some of you will be saying Jaws is kind of soft to be a horror movie, and maybe you'd also say that about all of the other choices that I've made on this list. But 12-year-old Ali was terrified by this film. I've always been so fascinated by sharks, so I was really looking forward to watching this movie, but at that age, at the age of 12, I did not at all appreciate anything that made me jump, and this film has one of the best jump scares of all time when you see the grand reveal of the shark when Chief Brody is throwing the chum into the water. This movie in the last sort of 5 years has really become my comfort film whenever I'm feeling sad. This is the movie that I put on. I would go as far as saying that this is one of the best films of all time, regardless of genre, and my reason for that is simple. It's the characters. It's the relationship between the three lead characters of Chief Brody, Hooper and Quint that really make this film the massive success that it is. I honestly think the shark is not actually that important to the movie. Yes, the need to kill the shark is what brings these three characters together, but this is the story of the dynamic between three people, all with very different ideologies and how they interact with each other. Obviously the story is helped along with the existence of the killer shark and the, primal fear that people have of the shark, but the shark has no personality or anything. The shark is barely shown for the majority of the movie, so it's our own fears and these characters that make us feel scared, to make us wonder where the shark is going to show up next, to make us wonder who is going to survive. I also think the practical effects that they use for the shark still hold up today when you compare them to the vast majority of other shark movies that have come since then. This is my favourite film of all time. And that is it. Those are my favourite horror movies. I would love to hear what your guys' favourite horror movies are. Feel free to let me know in the comments below. If you did enjoy the video, give it a like, hit the subscribe button, and all that other YouTube bollocks. If you like the music that you're hearing in the background, it was actually all produced by me. I have another channel where I post beats/instrumentals that I've made for singers to use to write songs to, so if that is something you are interested in, I'll put a link in the description. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.